And we're going to get started right away. There is outrage from students at the University of Ottawa after 34 professors signed a letter in defense of a colleague suspended for using the N-word in class. The professor reportedly used the racial slur as an example of a word that's been reclaimed by a community. Her colleagues are saying there should be room for debate in the classroom and beyond. Is there place for this debate at a university and beyond?
No, and it should be embarrassing that students paid a whole heap of money just to be there to educate their professors. Make it make sense for me. Well, Jay says this on Facebook. She could have avoided its use and still made her point. She wanted to flex her muscles, expecting entitlement to protect her. She should at the very least be suspended. Imagine being a black student and this professor having to grade your paper. And I 100% agree. Now, we all know I've been in a situation where you had to kind of speak up against the use of the N-word. And people tried to argue that it was for pack and punch. Well, if you're using the full N-word with the hard ER at the end for pack and punch, then we have to question your intention. Now, it amazes me the amount of white people that really fight so hard to use this word. And it leads me to this question: why do you want to use this word so bad? You got to live with that question. Why are you fighting to use this word so bad? Now, I try to be empathetic. I try to understand, because for so long, yes has been something that has shown up in the lives of many for a very long time. They have never heard the word no. So for the one instance where you've been told, no, you cannot use that word, no, you cannot indulge in any debate on whether or not black people can use that word, it feels like oppression. But this is just a great example when it comes to the other professors that sign their name to help support their friend of why people don't come forward and report these things in the first place. Is institutions, peers, bosses will always take out for the oppressor. And that is where we're at right now.
Wow, Kayla. That was amazing. I have a comment on Twitter here from Language Nerd, and she or he wrote, "I can't believe people are more concerned about the right to use the word than they are about the pain it can cause. Is it really that hard to censor yourself and say N-word instead? Does doing so take away from the purported lesson?" And it's exactly what occurred to me, Language Nerd. You know, I've managed to live an entire life without saying the word. And to be honest, it hasn't been that difficult. And to be clear, I do think a university seems like the precise place to be discussing how words change and why. But again, like everyone here is saying, would the meaning have been lost if the professor had just said the N-word instead of the actual word? Would anyone have been confused about the meaning? I don't think academic freedom would have been stifled, and I think a conversation could have unfolded quite naturally. And you gotta wonder, has this professor been on sabbatical for the last 8 months? The last 2 years?
It's a great question, Jess, because I actually don't know how you get to be a white adult and not be aware of the fact that this word is not for you. I will say, truthfully, I have gotten into some uncomfortable situations with my son. He's a big fan of hip hop, and songs are edited oftentimes for radio. But I did call up a Drake song that he really liked and found the original version, and was shocked when to discover that word was used in there. And I turned it off because I didn't feel like he's at the age where he can understand the nuance of that conversation. Having said that, I just came across this beautiful video by a Black author named Ta-Nehisi Coates, and he gave this beautiful explanation for those who are still confused about why this word is not for you. He talked about how when he and his wife, for example, are talking to each other, they often use the word honey. And that's because they have a relationship. If somebody walked in off the street and called him or his wife honey, that would be weird. That would be inappropriate. He also used the example of the fact that he calls his father dad. And they have that relationship, but not everyone has that relationship. He also referred to the B word, that word that rhymes with itch that we're very familiar with, and how sometimes his wife will use that word within her friend group. But again, if he came in and used that, that would not be appropriate. So it's not that hard to understand. The problem is, why do so many white people, as Kayla mentioned, feel that they have a problem with this? And it's an entitlement problem. There's no question about this. He says, and I quote, I think for white people, the experience of being a hip hop fan and not being able to use the N-word is actually very insightful. It gives you a little peek into the world of what it means to be Black. And I'll put this up on my social media later on because I think the way he describes it is beautiful.
Yeah, and the thing is that, you know, for this professor in particular, what's especially frustrating is that the lesson, I think, was about reclaiming words and a community reclaiming words. So the point of the lesson was that the Black community can reclaim this word and use it or not use it according to how they feel. But it is not a word for anybody else to claim. And then in using it, though, like in full, I just think that that's also like bad logical teaching. You know what I mean? It's like you set up an argument and then you totally undermine the argument. So it's like teaching an equation and then not being able to do the mathematics behind the equation. I just don't know. I don't understand where this comes from.
No. Let her use it, but use it indiscriminately, okay? Use it at the grocery store. Use it around your friend circle. Use it in your Black friend space. Don't just try to be all cute now and say you're just using it because you're in a sophisticated space. If y'all want to use the N-word with the ER at the end, use it everywhere, but you won't do it, and you know exactly why you will not do it. So that is the point right there. I would also like to say, because there are always people up in my mentions talking about, well, then Black people should stop using it because it's such a bad word. That is not your call. That is not your call, and you know it's not your call. And we're gonna deal with that in our conversations. But for you to feel like you are entitled to tell people what they can and cannot do is exactly the point. Man, I'm just off this.
I agree. I am interested, though, in this conversation around what words are allowed to be reclaimed by just mass people. Queer, for example, is a word that we've used on the show before. I'm using it now. And people of a certain generation would remember that that was also a slur that was used and lobbied against the LGBT community. And it was very hurtful. So you'll find that there are some people from a certain generation who really don't have any interest in that word being reclaimed. In the way that the F word, perhaps, within the gay community cannot be reclaimed in quite the same way. And lately we've heard the word savage being thrown around a lot. Rihanna, of course, her line, there are songs that use that word. And the fact is that that is a word that it's associated with colonialism, with oppression, and particularly has been used against Indigenous people. So I think we should all be ready to pivot at any given moment when people do come forward who are from the community that are being harmed by these words and listen to what their experience and how they feel about it being used or reclaimed.
Here's the thing, though, Cynthia, I totally agree with you. And those conversations about savage, for sure, must be had. But with respect to the etymology of the N-word, it originated out of Latin, meant to denote a certain description of a person's skin color, skin tone. And it was, back in the 1600s and before, originally used to describe people who were being transported from Africa over to other places in Europe and North America. We know what we call those people, slaves. So always, from the history of the word, the N-word, it was always used pejoratively. Whereas, as you said, the word queer, for example, etymology came about in the 1500s, and back then it wasn't used to describe same-sex couples. That wasn't used to describe people who are gay. It became of popular use in the 1920s. But this word, this N-word, has always, from its inception, been bad.
From time. Could you imagine being a Black student walking and going to school, and this is how your professors feel about you? What is the University of Ottawa to do to make sure that their Black students are going to feel protected? It is very clear, it is no secret that the N-word is still a very violent and triggering word for some, if not a lot of Black people. So that is the concern for me, is how are you protecting your students who have to then see their professors who fought so hard or want to fight so hard for someone to use the N-word?